Sable Thornwick had not planned to touch the Alpha King tonight. She had not planned to be anywhere near him. And she certainly had not planned to be standing in the middle of the throne hall at 11 minutes before midnight, her fingers wrapped around his wrist, while every noble in the kingdom watched. But here she was. His pulse beat slow and heavy beneath her thumb. His skin burned like something feverish lived just under the surface. And his eyes, those terrible pale gold eyes that had ended treaties and started wars, were locked on her face with an expression she could not read. The silence in the hall was absolute. 300 guests stood frozen mid-celebration. Goblets hung suspended between table and mouth. The orchestra had stopped playing 6 bars into the processional waltz, and no one had thought to start them again. Chancellor Marin stood at the foot of the dais, his prepared midnight speech crumpling in his fist, his mouth opening and closing as though every word he had ever learned had abandoned him at once. Sable could feel the weight of every stare in the room pressing down on her shoulders. She could feel her own heartbeat hammering so violently in her throat that breathing had become an act of conscious effort. She needed to let go. She needed to release the king's wrist, step backward, curtsy or bow, or do whatever one was supposed to do after accidentally grabbing the most dangerous man on the continent, and then disappear into the crowd and possibly into a different country. But she could not let go, because beneath her fingers something was happening, something that should not have been possible. The tremor in his hand, the one she had noticed from across the room, the involuntary shaking that had driven her forward without thinking, was stopping. The muscles in his forearm, rigid as iron rope a moment ago, were loosening. The heat pouring off his skin was cooling. And the king, who according to every rumor and first-hand account had not been able to hold his human form for longer than 6 hours at a stretch for the past 4 months, was breathing like someone who had just set down something impossibly heavy. His eyes never left her face. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was lower than she had expected, rougher, like something worn down to the grain from too much use. Sable opened her mouth to answer. Before she could speak, a hand closed around her upper arm. Hard fingers dug into the flesh above her elbow and yanked her backward, breaking the contact between her skin and the king's. "Apologies, Your Majesty," Lady Veronique Ashgrove said, her voice like polished marble. "This woman is a servant. She has no business on the dais." The moment Sable's fingers left the king's wrist, the tremor returned. It started in his hand first, a subtle vibration, then crawled up his arm. His jaw tightened. The gold in his eyes brightened, shifted, began to bleed into something less human. His wolf was rising. The nobles nearest the throne scrambled backward. A woman in emerald silk knocked over a candelabra. Wax and fire hit the floor, and no one stopped to clean it up because the Alpha King's bones were cracking. "Everyone out," Commander Dalevashion ordered from the side entrance, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "Clear the hall, now." But Sable was already being dragged toward the doors. Lady Veronique's grip was bruising, her pace fast and furious. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" Veronique hissed. Sable twisted to look back over her shoulder. Through the chaos of fleeing guests and overturned chairs, she caught one last glimpse of the king. He was on his knees. His hands were pressed flat against the stone floor. His head bowed. And even from across the hall she could see his spine arching, the bones shifting beneath his skin, the change fighting to take him. His eyes found hers through the crowd. Gold and desperate and furious and something else she did not have a name for. Then the doors slammed shut between them. 6 hours earlier, Sable had been exactly where she belonged, in the east scullery up to her elbows in dishwater, scrubbing the banquet platters that would hold tonight's feast. She was a kitchen drudge at Greymount Keep, the lowest tier of palace staff. She slept in a narrow cot in a room she shared with 3 other girls. She ate whatever the cooks did not need. She had no bloodline, no rank, and no particular ambition beyond surviving another winter without catching lung fever. The name Thornwick had been given to her by the castle steward when she was found on the kitchen steps as an infant. It was not a family name. It was a label. What she did have was a gift she had never told anyone about. She could feel wolves, not hear them, not see them, feel them. A low vibration that hummed through her bones when a shifter was near. Most of the time, it was nothing more than a background buzz, easy to ignore, like the sound of wind against shutters. But tonight, during the Frost Moon celebration, as she had been carrying a stack of clean platters through the service corridor behind the throne hall, the buzz had turned into a scream. Not sound. Sensation. A violent, tearing, agonized pulse that hit her so hard she had stumbled, nearly dropping the platters. Something was wrong with a wolf. Something was terribly, desperately wrong. She had set the platters down without thinking and pushed through the service door into the main hall. 300 bodies in finery, music and candlelight and laughter. And at the far end, seated on the elevated throne, the Alpha King of Greymount, King Kael Denvari. Even from a distance she could see it. The white-knuckle grip on the arm of his throne. The tension locked into every line of his body. The way his chest expanded on each breath like breathing itself was a battle. And in her bones, the scream kept building. She had moved toward him without deciding to. Her feet carried her through the crowd, past silk gowns and polished boots and startled faces. She mounted the dais steps, and the guards, caught off guard by her plain servant's dress, hesitated just long enough. She reached for his wrist, and the scream went quiet. Now she stood outside the sealed throne hall doors, Veronique's fingers still clamped around her arm, and felt the tremor of his wolf through the stone floor beneath her feet. "You will be removed from the grounds before midnight," Veronique said, her voice clipped and final. "You will not return." "But he needs," Sable started. "The king needs nothing from a scullery girl." Veronique's eyes were ice. "Whatever you did, whatever trick you performed, it ends tonight." 2 guards appeared at the end of the corridor. Veronique released Sable's arm and smoothed her gloves as though she had touched something unclean. "Escort her beyond the outer wall," Veronique instructed. "Before the midnight bell. She does not enter these grounds again." The guards took her by the elbows. Sable looked back one final time at the sealed doors, behind which the most powerful alpha in the realm was losing his war against his own wolf. Then they marched her into the cold. The midnight bell rang while she was crossing the bridge beyond the outer wall. The sound rolled over the frozen landscape like a death knell. Sable pulled her thin kitchen smock tighter around her shoulders and kept walking. She had nowhere to go. The frost had settled thick by the time Sable reached the tree line. Her breath came out in pale clouds. Her fingers were numb, her feet aching inside shoes meant for kitchen stone, not frozen earth. She had no money, no coat, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and Greymount Keep before Lady Veronique decided that exile was not punishment enough. She sat beneath a rowan tree, drew her knees to her chest, and tried to stop shivering. That was when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly. The vibration, low and deep, resonating through the ground beneath her, through the roots of the tree, through her bones. A wolf was coming. Sable scrambled to her feet, her pulse spiking. The forests around Greymount were not safe at night. Rogues hunted these woods. Ferals, too. Wolves who had lost their human minds entirely. The trees ahead of her shifted, branches cracked, and then he emerged from the dark. He was enormous, the largest wolf she had ever seen. His coat was charcoal black edged with silver, and his eyes burned gold in the moonlight. The same gold she had seen on the dais. The Alpha King! Sable stopped breathing. He crossed the clearing in 4 strides and stopped directly in front of her. Close enough that she could see the frost crystallizing on his fur. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his massive body like a furnace. His wolf was fully in control. She could feel it, the raw, untamed intelligence behind those gold eyes. This was not the measured, controlled king who sat in council chambers and signed treaties. This was something older and wilder and infinitely more dangerous. The wolf lowered his head and pressed his muzzle against her open palm. The contact sent a jolt through her entire body. Not pain. Something deeper. Something that hummed in the place where her gift lived, the place that felt wolves. It sang through her like a bell being struck, clear and resonant and impossibly right. The wolf exhaled against her hand, a long, shuddering breath. And then, he lay down. Right there, in the frozen clearing, the Alpha King's wolf lay down at her feet, pressed his massive body against her legs, and closed his eyes. The trembling stopped. The frantic pulse of distress that she had felt from him all night went still. His breathing deepened, his muscles loosened. The wolf, the one that had been tearing his human body apart from the inside, went calm. Sable stood there, her hand resting on the crown of his head, too shocked to move. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The cold bit into her skin, but the wolf's body was impossibly warm, and where he pressed against her she felt nothing but heat. She lowered herself slowly, carefully, until she was sitting beside him. He shifted immediately, curling around her, his massive frame creating a wall of warmth between her and the wind. She did not sleep. She sat with her back against the rowan tree and her fingers buried in the fur of the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, and she watched the stars turn overhead. At some point, she began to talk. Not to anyone, just to the silence. Small things. The kitchen, the way the head cook, Mistress Yarrow, sang off-key while kneading bread. The apprentice who had accidentally dropped an entire wheel of cheese down the cellar stairs last week. The wolf's ears twitched at the cheese story. Sable could have sworn she felt amusement through the bond, through the connection, through whatever impossible thing linked her bones to his. Dawn came slowly. The sky shifted from black to deep blue to pale gray. The frost on the ground glittered like scattered glass. The wolf stirred. She felt the change before she saw it. A ripple beneath the fur, a crackle of bone and sinew, and then the wolf was gone, and a man was lying beside her. King Kael Denvari, barefoot, wearing nothing but the frost on his skin, his dark hair tangled with leaves. His eyes opened slowly, and they were gray now, human gray, clear and focused in a way that she somehow understood they had not been in a very long time. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You are the girl from the hall," he said. His voice was hoarse, frayed at the edges, barely holding together. "I am," Sable said, trying very hard to look only at his face. "And you are very underdressed, Your Majesty." Something flickered in his expression, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "My wolf ran," he said. "I did not choose this." "Your wolf found me," Sable corrected gently. The silence that followed was heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Then footsteps crashed through the undergrowth. Commander Dale Vashon burst into the clearing with 4 guards at his back, all of them breathing hard, all of them armed. The commander took in the scene, the king on the ground, the kitchen girl beside him, the obvious absence of clothing, and his face went through several complicated expressions before settling on carefully blank. "Your Majesty," Dale said, "we have been searching for you since the 2nd hour." Kael rose slowly to his feet. Someone threw a cloak around his shoulders. He stood there in the pale morning light, and Sable could see what the wolf had hidden. The hollows under his eyes, the sharpness of his cheekbones, the way his body, powerful as it was, carried the unmistakable weight of prolonged suffering. He turned to look at her. "Bring her back to the keep," he said. Dale frowned. "Your Majesty, Lady Veronique gave orders that this woman was to be permanently removed from the grounds." "Lady Veronique," the king said quietly, "does not give orders that override mine." He held Sable's gaze for one more moment. Something passed between them, unspoken and electric, and then he turned and walked into the trees with his guards. Dale looked at Sable. His expression was unreadable. "Can you walk?" he asked. Sable stood on stiff, frozen legs. "Do I have a choice?" "The king commands your return to Greymount Keep," Dale replied. "So no, you do not." They walked back toward the castle in silence. Sable's heart hammered the entire way. The room they put her in was not the scullery. It was a small stone chamber on the third floor of the eastern tower, with a narrow window, a proper bed, and a door that locked from the inside. It was the nicest room Sable had ever slept in, and the fact that she had no idea why she was in it made it impossible to enjoy. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of the past 12 hours. Touched the king. Got thrown out. King's wolf found her in the woods. King woke up beside her in human form. And now she was in a guest chamber instead of a gutter. A knock at the door made her flinch. Commander Dale Vashan stood in the corridor, his arms folded, his face arranged in the same careful blankness he had worn in the forest. "The king requests a meeting," he said, "in his private study. Now." Sable's stomach dropped. "Am I in trouble?" Dale studied her for a moment. "That depends entirely on what happens in the next hour." The walk to the king's study felt endless. Every corridor seemed longer than it should have been. Every guard they passed stared at her kitchen-stained dress and her unbrushed hair, and the dark circles under her eyes. Dale opened the study door without knocking. The room was warm and dim, lit by a fire that had been burning for hours. Maps and correspondence covered every surface. King Kale stood by the window, dressed now in a dark shirt and trousers, his back to the room. He did not turn when they entered. "Leave us," he said. Dale hesitated. "Your Majesty, I would recommend a guard remains present for." "Leave us, Dale." The commander left. The door closed, and Sable was alone with the king. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. She could feel his wolf beneath the surface, could feel that low hum vibrating through her bones. It was calmer than last night, but it was there, present, aware of her. "Sit," the king said without turning. Sable sat in the nearest chair, her hands folded tight in her lap. "My wolf has not been under my control for 4 months," Kale said. Each word was measured, placed carefully, as though he were reciting a report rather than confessing something deeply personal. "Since the siege of Valcrest, since I watched my beta die." He turned to face her. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face, and she saw what she had felt in the forest. Exhaustion so deep it had settled into his bones. Pain so constant it had become part of his architecture. "The shifts come without warning," he continued. "They are violent, prolonged, increasingly frequent. The court physicians have tried sedatives, binding rituals, even silver restraints." His jaw tightened. "Nothing works. My wolf surfaces and my mind goes dark, and when I wake, hours or sometimes days have passed." Sable listened. She did not interrupt. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and let him speak. "3 nights ago, during a diplomatic dinner with the Northern Alliance, I shifted at the table. My wolf destroyed the dining hall. 2 ambassadors were injured. The alliance nearly collapsed." He paused. "Chancellor Marin has been containing the damage, but his resources are running thin. The court knows. The kingdom knows. Their king is losing his mind." "You are not losing your mind," Sable said before she could stop herself. His gaze sharpened. "How would you know?" "Because I felt your wolf," she replied. "Last night, in the hall, I felt him before I saw you. And he was not out of control. He was in agony." The king went still. "Your wolf is not trying to overthrow you," Sable said, the words coming from the place inside her that understood wolves. "He is trying to tell you something you are not hearing." The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the fire popping. "What did you do to me?" Kale asked quietly. "In the hall." When you touched my wrist. I did not do anything, Sable said. I just reached for you. And my wolf went quiet for the first time in 4 months. He studied her, his gray eyes searching. What are you? A kitchen drudge, Sable said flatly, with very chapped hands and a name I was given by a castle steward. His mouth twitched, just barely. DL, the king called. The door opened immediately. The commander had clearly been standing right outside it. Arrange a controlled environment, Kale said. Tomorrow morning, I want Miss Thornwick present during my next shift. Under observation, Healer Brian will monitor the vitals. He paused. No one else. No court. No council. No chancellors. Dale's eyebrows rose fractionally. And Lady Veronique? Something darkened in the king's expression. Lady Veronique will be informed that the girl remains on my authority. If she has objections, she can bring them to me directly. Dale nodded and left. Sable sat in the chair, her heart pounding. What happens tomorrow? She asked. We find out if what happened last night was real, Kale said. Or a coincidence. And if it was real. The king looked at her, and for the first time she saw something behind the exhaustion and the control and the careful distance. Something that looked almost like hope. Then we have a great deal to discuss, he said. Sable returned to the stone chamber in a daze. She sat on the bed. She stared at the wall. Her mind replayed every moment from the hall, from the forest, from the study. His wolf had found her. In the dark, in the cold. Miles from the keep. Wolves did not do that. Not for strangers. Not for kitchen girls with no bloodline and no rank. Something was very wrong, or something was very right. She could not tell which possibility frightened her more. A slip of paper appeared beneath her door as the evening bells rang. She picked it up with trembling fingers. It read, in neat, severe handwriting, "You have made a powerful enemy tonight. Leave Greymount while you still can." It was unsigned. Sable stared at the note, her blood running cold. Then she folded it carefully, placed it beneath her pillow, and lay down in the dark. She did not sleep. The controlled test took place in the king's private armory, a windowless stone room beneath the eastern tower, lined with weapons and reinforced with iron bolts, the kind of room built to contain things that should not get out. Healer Brian was already inside when Sable arrived. She was a tall, angular woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to sharpen her cheekbones. She moved with the precise efficiency of someone who had spent decades solving problems that had no right to be solved. "Sit there," Brian said, pointing to a wooden bench along the far wall. "Do not move unless I tell you to. Do not touch him unless I tell you to. Do not speak unless I tell you to." Sable sat. "And if he shifts? Then you will be very grateful for the iron door behind you." Commander Dial stood near the entrance, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were not. The king entered last. He looked worse than yesterday. The hollows beneath his eyes had deepened. His skin carried a grayish pallor that no amount of firelight could warm. He moved stiffly, each step measured and deliberate, like a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. Sable felt his wolf the moment he crossed the threshold. The vibration rolled through her bones, sharper than before, more urgent. The wolf was close to the surface today, pressing against the barrier between man and beast like a fist against glass. "Begin," Kale said to Brian. The healer produced a leather case from her satchel and laid out her instruments on a cloth. She pressed her fingers to the king's wrist, counting beats. She held a polished silver disc against his chest and listened. She examined his eyes, his nails, the color beneath his tongue. Elevated pulse, skin temperature 3 degrees above baseline, pupil dilation inconsistent. Brian straightened. His wolf is within minutes of surfacing. Sable felt it too. The vibration was building, sharpening into something jagged and urgent. "Miss Thornwick," Brienne said. "Approach." Sable stood. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her. She crossed the room toward the king, each step amplifying the hum in her bones until it filled her entire body. Cale watched her approach. His jaw was locked tight. A bead of sweat traced a line down his temple. She could see the faintest ripple beneath the skin of his forearms, muscle and tendon shifting in ways that were not entirely human. "Your hand," Brienne instructed. On his wrist. Like before. Sable reached out. Her fingers trembled as they closed around his wrist. The effect was immediate. The vibration shifted. Not louder or softer, but different in quality, like a note that had been sharp suddenly finding its true pitch. She felt the wolf respond. Not retreat. Not go quiet. Something stranger. Something like recognition. Cale exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to empty him entirely. The tension in his shoulders released. The rippling beneath his skin stilled. His eyes, which had been brightening toward gold, slowly dimmed back to gray. Brienne watched. Her face betrayed nothing, but Sable could see her fingers tightening around the silver disc. "Remarkable," the healer murmured. "His readings are normalizing." "How long?" Dale asked from the doorway. "She has been touching him for 40 seconds. The silence in the room took on weight. Brienne ran the tests again. Pulse, temperature, pupils. Every marker had dropped. The wolf that had been clawing toward the surface a minute ago was resting now, settled deep, like something that had finally found a place to lie down. Sable let go. Within 3 minutes, the tremor returned. Within 5, the rippling started beneath his skin. "Touch him again," Brienne said. Sable took his wrist. Calm returned. They repeated the cycle 4 times. Contact. Calm. Release. Crisis. Contact. Calm. Every time, the result was the same. After the 4th round, Brienne set down her instruments and looked at the king. "This is not coincidence," she said. "Her proximity stabilizes your wolf in a way nothing else has achieved. Physical contact accelerates the effect dramatically." "Why?" Cale asked. "I have theories. None of them are simple." Brienne paused. "Have you heard of a resonance anchor?" The king's expression shifted. Something dark and complicated moved behind his eyes. "That is a myth," he said. "Most myths are poorly documented truths," Brienne replied. "A resonance anchor is an individual whose biological frequency matches a specific wolf so precisely that proximity alone creates a stabilizing effect. It is exceptionally rare, perhaps 1 case per generation." "And what does it mean?" Sable asked carefully. "For the anchor?" Brienne looked at her. For the first time, something that might have been sympathy flickered across her sharp features. "It means your life just became significantly more complicated," she said. That evening, the arrangement was formalized. Commander Dael delivered the terms to Sable's chamber, with the same careful blankness he seemed to wear like armor. "You will be relocated to a chamber adjacent to the king's quarters. You will be present during all critical periods, specifically evenings and early mornings when the wolf is most volatile. You will be available at short notice if a shift begins outside scheduled hours." He paused. "As far as the court is concerned, you have been reassigned to the king's household staff." Sable listened. "And if I refuse?" Dale's expression did not change. "The king is dying, Miss Thornwick. His wolf is consuming him. Without intervention, he has 3 months at most." He let the words settle. "You are the only intervention that has worked." Sable pressed her hands flat against her knees to stop them from shaking. "I will do it," she said. "But I need something from you." "Name it." "This note was slid under my door last night." She handed him the folded paper. "I believe Lady Veronique wants me gone." Dell read the note. His jaw tightened fractionally, which was the most emotion she had ever seen from him. "I will look into it," he said. "In the meantime, Your new quarters will have a guard posted outside at all hours." He left. Sable sat alone in the room that had been hers for less than a day and tried to breathe. 3 months. The king had 3 months to live, and the only thing standing between him and death was a kitchen girl who could feel wolves. She moved into the adjacent chamber that night. A proper wardrobe, a writing desk, a window that overlooked the inner courtyard, and a connecting door to the king's chambers that locked from both sides. She did not use the connecting door. Not that first night, but she could feel him through the wall. The low hum of his wolf, restless and pacing, cycling between agitation and something that felt like searching. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone and felt the vibration sing through her bones. On the other side of the wall, the searching stopped. The wolf settled. Sable kept her hand there until she fell asleep. A rhythm formed. In the mornings, Sable arrived at the king's study before the council meetings began. She sat in a chair near the window, close enough for proximity to hold the wolf steady, far enough to maintain the illusion of propriety. The counselors ignored her or pretended to. Most of them thought she was a new secretary. Lady Veronique knew exactly what she was, and her gaze, whenever it found Sable, was cold enough to freeze marrow. In the evenings, Sable returned to her chamber and pressed her hand against the wall. She could feel him on the other side. His wolf rising as darkness came, the shifts always worse at night, and her nearness pulling the beast back down like a tide retreating from a shore. They did not speak much during the first week. The king was formal, distant, painfully polite in the way that only deeply uncomfortable people could manage. He thanked her each morning when she arrived. He nodded to her each evening when she left. He called her Miss Thornwick in a tone that suggested he had practiced it. It was on the 9th day that the wall cracked. Sable had been sitting in her usual chair during a trade negotiation, 3 hours of tariff disputes and grain quotas, during which she had embroidered the hem of a handkerchief she had borrowed from Brienne and tried not to fall asleep. The meeting ended. The counselors filed out. Sable stood to leave and tripped on the edge of the rug. She did not fall. She caught herself on the desk, scattering 2 inkwells and a stack of treaty proposals across the floor. "I am so sorry," she said, dropping to her knees to gather the papers. Ink was pooling across the top page, obliterating what looked like months of careful negotiation. "Oh no. Oh, this is bad. Is this important?" "It is a trade agreement with the eastern provinces," Cale said. He was standing over her, looking down at the spreading ink with an expression that hovered somewhere between disbelief and resignation. "Can it be rewritten?" It took Chancellor Marin 7 weeks to draft. Sable stared at the ruined document in her hands. Ink dripped from the edges onto her skirt. She wanted the floor to open beneath her. "In fairness," the king said, "it was a terrible agreement." Sable looked up at him. His mouth was doing something complicated, fighting against itself. And then the fight was lost and the corner of his lips curved upward. He was smiling, small and reluctant, and real. Sable bit her lip. "So I have done the eastern provinces a favor?" "You have done everyone a favor. Marin will disagree, but Marin disagrees with sunlight." She laughed. It came out before she could stop it, bright and sudden in the quiet room. The king looked startled, like the sound was something unexpected and slightly dangerous that he needed a moment to evaluate. Then his expression softened. "You may call me Cale," he said. "When we are alone." Sable's breath caught. "That does not seem appropriate." "Very little about this arrangement is appropriate," he replied. "We might as well be honest about it." After that, the formality began to dissolve. It happened in small, careful increments. He asked her about the kitchens. She told him about Mistress Yarrow and her off-key singing. He asked about the cheese apprentice, and she told that story too, and watched him fight another smile. She asked about the siege, not the battle itself. She was not ready for that, and neither was he, but the landscape, the mountains. What Valcrest looked like before the war. Cold, he said. Beautiful. The kind of place that makes you feel insignificant in the best way. I have never been anywhere that made me feel insignificant in a good way, Sable said. He looked at her with something that made the air between them feel thin. I would like to show it to you someday, he said quietly. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and the silence between them was warm. The evenings changed too. Instead of pressing her hand against the wall, she began leaving the connecting door open a few inches. Just enough so that the proximity could do its work without the barrier of stone between them. She could hear him in the next room, the scratch of his pen, the creak of his chair. Occasionally, a low sound that might have been cursing in a language she did not recognize. You are still awake, she said one night through the gap in the door. A pause. So are you. Your wolf is restless tonight. Another pause. Longer. You can feel that? I always feel it. He is pacing. Silence. Would it help? She asked carefully. If I came in? The silence that followed lasted so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Yes, he said. The word came out rough, almost unwilling. She pushed the door open and stepped into his chambers. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that made the room feel smaller than it was. She sat beside him on the bed, not touching, close enough that the air between them hummed. His wolf settled within minutes. She felt it ease down, the jagged vibration smoothing into something steady and deep. How long has it been since you slept through the night? She asked. I do not remember. You should lie down. He did not move. If I shift in my sleep, I could hurt you. You will not. You cannot know that. I know your wolf, she said simply. He will not hurt me. He turned his head to look at her. In the firelight, his gray eyes were flecked with gold. Not the wild, desperate gold of a shift, but something quieter, warmer. Lie down, she said again. I will stay until you fall asleep. He lay back slowly, his body rigid with tension, his hands clenched at his sides. Sable remained sitting on the edge of the bed, her hip barely touching his arm. Minutes passed. His breathing deepened, his fists uncurled. His body released its grip on wakefulness one muscle at a time, and she watched it happen with a tenderness that frightened her. He was asleep. She sat there for a long time, watching the firelight move across his face. Without the weight of kingship pressing down on him, he looked younger, softer, almost peaceful. She reached out, very slowly, and brushed a strand of dark hair from his forehead. His wolf hummed beneath his skin, content and steady, and something in Sable's chest answered. She pulled her hand back. This was dangerous. Not the wolf, not the arrangement, not even Veronique's threats. This. The way her heart was folding itself around a man she had no right to want. The way proximity had become necessity. The way she had started listening for his footsteps in the corridor, the way other people listened for music. She stood carefully and returned to her own chamber through the connecting door. She did not close it. 2 weeks into the arrangement, the wolf escaped. Not at night, not during a council meeting, not during any of the controlled windows that Brienne had mapped and planned for. It happened at midday, in the training yard, while the king was sparring with Commander Dael. Sable was not there. She was in Brienne's study, 3 floors up and across the keep, reviewing the healer's research on resonance anchors. She felt the shift hit like a fist to the chest. The vibration exploded through her with no warning, violent and tearing. She gasped. The book fell from her hands. Brienne was on her feet instantly. He is shifting, Sable choked out. They ran, down the tower stairs, through the eastern corridor, across the great hall. Sable's lungs burned. Her body shook with the feedback of the wolf's distress, every nerve alight with a pain that was not hers. They burst through the doors into the training yard. Chaos. Guards pressed against the walls. 2 soldiers on the ground, alive but bleeding. And in the center of the yard, the wolf. Charcoal black, silver-edged, enormous. His hackles were raised and his teeth were bared, and every muscle in his body was coiled to strike. His eyes blazed gold with no trace of gray, no trace of human. Commander Dale stood 20 feet away, his sword drawn, his face white. "Do not approach," Dale shouted when he saw Sable. "He does not recognize anyone, he has already." Sable walked past him. "Miss Thornwick," Dale barked. "Stop." She kept walking. The wolf swung toward her. A snarl ripped from his throat, deep and savage, vibrating through the stone beneath her feet. His lips pulled back from teeth that could sever bone. His body lowered into a crouch. Sable stopped 10 feet away. Her heart was hammering so hard her vision pulsed at the edges. "I know you," she said. The wolf's snarl faltered. His ears shifted, swiveling forward. "I know you," she repeated, her voice shaking but steady. "And you know me." She reached out her hand, palm open, fingers trembling. The yard was silent. Every guard, every soldier, every person watching from the windows above held their breath. The wolf took a step toward her, then another. His snarl died. His hackles flattened. He crossed the remaining distance in 3 strides and pressed his muzzle into her open palm. The vibration in her chest transformed. The jagged, tearing wrongness smoothed into that resonant hum, clear as a bell, and the wolf exhaled against her skin. He lay down at her feet. The yard remained silent for a very long time. Brianne reached her first. The healer's hands were shaking, which was something Sable had never seen before. "The shift will reverse on its own now," Brianne said quietly. "His wolf is calm. Give it time." "How much time?" "Minutes. Perhaps an hour." Sable lowered herself to the ground beside the wolf. He shifted immediately, pressing his massive body against her side, his head settling into her lap with a weight that pinned her to the stone. She sat there in the middle of the training yard, surrounded by armed guards and bleeding soldiers, and an audience of terrified onlookers, with the Alpha King's wolf curled in her lap. The shift reversed 20 minutes later. This time, someone had the foresight to bring a cloak. Kale woke disoriented, his head still in her lap, his body wrapped in wool. He blinked up at her, and for a moment he looked lost in a way that had nothing to do with the shift, and everything to do with the fact that he was lying in a woman's lap in a public courtyard with half the castle watching. "Welcome back," Sable said softly. He sat up too quickly. His hand went to his head, pressing against his temple. "Did I hurt anyone?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Sable glanced at Dael. The commander's expression was grim. "2 guards," Dael said. "Minor injuries. They will recover." Kale closed his eyes. Something in his face collapsed inward, and Sable recognized it. Shame. Deep, corrosive, consuming shame. "This is getting worse," he said. "You shifted in full daylight," Brianne confirmed, without provocation. "The intervals between episodes are shrinking." "And when she is not present, there is no stopping it," Dael added. He turned to Sable. "You need to be with him at all times, not adjacent, not nearby, with him." The implications of that sentence filled the space between all of them. "That is not possible," Kale said flatly. "She cannot shadow me through every meeting, every meal, every—" "You shifted during a sparring session and injured 2 of your own men," Dale interrupted, his voice harder than Sable had ever heard it. "What happens when it occurs during a state dinner? A treaty signing? A battlefield command?" He stepped closer. "You are running out of time, and she is the only thing that works." The king looked at Sable. His expression was raw in a way that made her breath catch. She could feel his wolf through the bond, could feel the shame and the exhaustion and something else, something desperate and hungry and terrified. I am sorry, he said to her. This is not the life you should be living. It is the life I have, Sable replied, and I would rather spend it keeping you alive than scrubbing platters in the scullery. He stared at her. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the fortress he had built around himself. Very well, he said quietly. That night, there was no connecting door between them. She sat in his chambers while he worked at his desk, close enough that their shoulders could have touched if either of them leaned. The wolf rested deep and easy, a warm presence she had grown so accustomed to feeling that its absence now registered as pain. He was writing. She was reading, one of Brienne's journals on wolf resonance theory. The fire crackled. The silence between them was comfortable in a way that made her pulse quicken. Sable, he said without looking up from his page. It was the first time he had used her given name. Yes? He hesitated, the pen stilled in his hand. Whatever he had been about to say, he swallowed it. Nothing, he said. Good night. She watched him a moment longer than she should have. Then she returned to her chair and opened her book, but she did not read another word. Later, when the fire had burned to embers and the king had fallen asleep at his desk, his head resting on his folded arms, Sable stood and draped a blanket across his shoulders. Her fingers brushed the back of his neck. The contact sent a shiver through them both. His wolf stirred, not in distress but in something warm and reaching, and the answering resonance inside her bloomed so bright it hurt. She pulled her hand away. She was falling for him. She knew it. She had known it for days, maybe longer. But knowing and admitting were different acts of courage, and she was not ready for the second one. She blew out the last candle and sat in the dark near his desk, listening to him breathe, and told herself that this was enough. It was not enough. It was not even close. Veronique struck 3 days later. Sable was returning from Brienne's study when she saw them. 2 members of the High Council, Lord Fenwick and Lady Ostara, standing outside the king's war room with Chancellor Marin. Their faces were tight with something beyond the usual political maneuvering. This was calculated outrage. Veronique stood behind them, her expression perfectly composed. She caught Sable's eye across the corridor and held it, one corner of her mouth curved upward. Sable's blood went cold. The doors to the war room opened. Dale stepped out and saw Sable immediately. You should not be here right now, he said, low and urgent in a way she had never heard from him before. What is happening? Dale hesitated. That alone told her everything. Lady Veronique has brought a formal petition before the council, he said. She is accusing you of bewitching the king, claiming you are using enchantment magic to control his wolf and manipulate his judgment. The ground tilted beneath Sable's feet. That is not true. It does not matter if it is true. It matters that 3 council members have signed it. The petition demands your immediate removal from the king's presence and an independent examination by the Northern Coven to determine whether you pose a magical threat to the crown. Sable pressed her back against the stone wall. Her chest was tight. And what does the king say? Dale's jaw worked. The king does not know yet. Veronique brought this directly to Marin and bypassed the throne. Why would she do that? Because if the petition reaches formal council vote before the king can intervene, it becomes binding. Even a king cannot overrule a unanimous council resolution on matters of magical security. He paused. She has been building this for weeks, Sable. Gathering signatures, positioning allies. She wants you gone, and she has found the legal mechanism to do it. But if I leave, he will die, Sable whispered. Dale looked at her. Something in his carefully controlled expression cracked, and she saw for the first time genuine fear. I know, he said. The council session lasted 4 hours. Sable was not permitted inside. She sat in the corridor outside the war room, her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, and listened to muffled voices arguing about her fate. Brienne found her there. The healer sat beside her on the cold stone floor, which was so out of character that Sable nearly wept. I have submitted my clinical findings to the council, Brian said. Documented evidence of every test, every measurement, every shift she stabilized. It is the strongest case I can make. Will it be enough? Brian was quiet for a moment. Veronique is not stupid. She is not arguing that you are ineffective. She is arguing that your effectiveness is itself evidence of magical coercion. The more I prove you work, the more she claims it proves you are a witch. Sable let her head fall back against the wall and stared at the vaulted ceiling. Why does she want this so badly? Sable asked. What have I done to her? Brian gave her a long, measured look. You have not done anything to her, but you have done something she could not. What? You have reached the king. The words settled over Sable like cold water. She thought of Veronique's face at court functions, the way she positioned herself near the throne, the proprietary edge in her voice when she spoke of the king's schedule, the king's meals, the king's health, the way she had been the one to give orders the night of the Frost Moon Ball, as though the authority was already hers. She wanted to be his mate, Sable realized aloud. She wanted to be queen, Brian corrected gently. And you are standing in her path. The war room doors opened. Chancellor Marin emerged looking 10 years older than he had that morning. He did not look at Sable. Behind him, Veronique stepped into the corridor. Her composure was immaculate. The council has voted, Marin announced. By a margin of 4-2, the petition is upheld. Miss Thornwick will be removed from the king's presence immediately, pending examination by the Northern Coven. Sable stood. Her legs shook beneath her. How long until the examination? The coven has been summoned. They will arrive within the fortnight. 2 weeks. 2 weeks without her. And the king's wolf would tear him apart. Where is he? Sable demanded. Where is the king? Marin would not meet her eyes. His Majesty has been informed. He is not taking the news well. A crash echoed from inside the war room, stone splintering, wood breaking. A sound that was half roar and half something worse. Sable moved toward the door. Dale caught her arm. You cannot, he said. The council order is effective immediately. If you touch him now, Veronique will use it as proof of magical compulsion. He is shifting, Sable said, her voice breaking. I can feel it. He is shifting right now, and if no one is there to. I know. Dale's grip tightened on her arm. But if you go in there, you will never be allowed near him again. Veronique will see to it. Another crash. The doors shuddered on their hinges. Guards scrambled into position. Sable stood in the corridor with Diel's hand on her arm and felt, through the resonance, through the bond that had no name and no precedent, the king's wolf ripping free. The agony was blinding. His and hers, tangled together, indistinguishable. She let Diel lead her away. They gave her back the stone chamber in the eastern tower, the one with the narrow window and the door that locked from the inside. Her things from the adjacent room had already been moved. Efficiently. Like someone had planned for this. Sable sat on the bed and pressed her palms against her sternum, trying to breathe through the tearing sensation beneath her ribs. She could still feel him. Distant now, muffled by stone and distance, but there. His wolf was raging, uncontrolled, dangerous. And every minute she was away, the connection between them stretched thinner, and the pain grew sharper. By morning, she could not stand without the room spinning. By the second day, she could not eat. By the third day, Brian came to examine her and found her pulse erratic, her temperature dropping, and her pupils unresponsive to light. This is not psychological, Brian told Dale outside the door, her voice stripped of its usual composure. Her body is shutting down. The resonance bond is not a convenience. It is physiological. Separating them is killing her. And him? He shifted 6 times yesterday. He recognizes no one. He destroyed the West Wing armory and put 3 guards in the infirmary. A silence. We are losing them both, Brian said. On the 4th night, Sable opened her eyes and knew she was dying. Not metaphorically, not dramatically. The simple clinical truth of it settled over her like a weight. Her heartbeat was slow and irregular. Her vision swam. The resonance in her chest, the one that had hummed with his wolf's presence since the night of the frost moon, was barely a whisper. She could still feel him, faintly, a distant, desperate pulse, like a heartbeat heard through deep water. He was dying too. Sable pushed herself upright. The room lurched sideways. She gripped the bed frame and waited for the world to stabilize. She had spent 4 days obeying the council's order. 4 days being responsible, being compliant, being the nameless kitchen girl who knew her place and did not cause trouble. And it was killing them both. She thought about what Brienne had told her during one of their sessions, weeks ago, when the healer had been explaining the theory of resonance anchors. The bond is not one-directional, Brienne had said. You stabilize his wolf, yes, but his wolf stabilizes you. You were incomplete before you met him, Sable. You simply did not know it. Sable stood. Her legs trembled. Her vision grayed at the edges. She did not care. She crossed to the door and opened it. The guard outside turned, startled. Miss Thornwick, you are not permitted to leave this room after. Then stop me, Sable said. The guard stared at her. She looked, she imagined, like something dragged from a sickbed. Pale, hollow-eyed, barely upright. The guard hesitated. It was enough. She stepped past him and walked down the corridor. Each step cost her something. Energy, balance, clarity. The stone walls blurred at the edges. She trailed one hand along the wall to keep herself upright, her fingers scraping against cold rock. She descended the tower stairs, crossed the eastern hall, turned down the corridor that led to the king's wing. 2 more guards at the entrance. They moved to block her path. Council orders? One of them said. No access to the king's quarters. Sable stopped. She could barely stand. The vibration inside her was flickering, weak and irregular, like a candle in a draft. Behind the guards, she heard it. A low, anguished howl that rattled the stones and made the torches gutter in their brackets. His wolf, alone, in agony. Please, she whispered. The guards exchanged a glance. From behind them, a voice spoke. Let her through. Commander Dial Vashan stepped from the shadows. His uniform was rumpled. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he had not slept in days. Sir, the council order specifically. I am aware of the council order, Dial said. I am also aware that the king will be dead by morning if we follow it. Let her through. The guard stepped aside. Dial walked with her down the final corridor. Veronique will use this against you, he said quietly. Against both of you. Let her, Sable replied. He opened the door to the king's chambers. The room was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Curtains shredded. Deep claw marks gouged into the stone walls and the wooden floor. The bed was in pieces. The desk was kindling. And in the center of the wreckage, the wolf lay on his side, his breathing shallow and labored. His coat, which had been lustrous charcoal and silver, was dull and matted. His ribs were visible beneath the fur. His eyes were closed. Sable dropped to her knees beside him. She pressed both hands into his fur and felt the resonance surge through her like water breaking through a dam. The effect was immediate and devastating. Not just the calming she had produced before. Something deeper. Something that went beyond stabilization and into the territory of things that did not have clinical names. The wolf's breathing changed. His body shuddered. A sound escaped him. Not a howl, not a whimper. Something between the two. His massive head turned and pressed against her stomach, and she felt the bond between them flare so bright it blotted out everything else. Sable wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. I am here, she whispered into his fur. I am here, and I am not leaving. Not for the council. Not for Veronique. Not for anyone. The wolf trembled against her. Then slowly, the shift began. She held him through it, through the sound of bones reshaping, through the contortion of muscle and sinew, through the transition from beast to man. She held him while the fur receded and the skin emerged and the body contracted into something human-sized and shaking. Kale lay in her arms, trembling, his face pressed against her collarbone. His skin was burning, his heartbeat was wild against her chest. "You came back," he said. The words broke apart as they left his mouth. "Of course I came back." His arms came around her, tight, desperate. He pulled her against him with a strength that should not have been possible for a man who had been dying an hour ago. "They told me you were ill," he said against her throat. "They told me the bond was hurting you. I tried to break it. I tried to let you go." "You cannot break it," Sable said, cradling his head against her. "And I do not want you to." He pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were gray, fully human, clear and present in a way she had not seen since their first morning in the forest. Tears streaked his face. "I am in love with you," he said. "I have been since the night my wolf found you under that tree. Since you sat in the cold with your hand in my fur and told me about a cheese wheel falling down the stairs." His voice broke. "And I have been trying not to be, because loving me will ruin your life." Sable cupped his face in both hands. "My life was scrubbing dishes in a scullery," she said. "You did not ruin anything." She kissed him. He responded like someone who had been drowning and had just broken the surface. His hands slid into her hair. His mouth moved against hers with a tenderness that was human and wolf, and something older than both. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, Sable rested her forehead against his. "Your wolf knew before you did," she murmured. "My wolf is smarter than I am," he admitted. She laughed. It came out watery and thick with tears, and he kissed her again, softer this time, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. They lay together in the wreckage of his chambers, tangled around each other on the bare floor because the bed no longer existed. His body curled around hers, and the bond between them pulsed warm and golden and unbreakable. For the first time in months, his wolf was silent. Not sleeping, not settled, not merely calm. Silent. At peace in a way that went beyond resonance and into the territory of something permanent. Sable felt it in her own chest, a stillness she had never known before. Like a door she had been pushing against her entire life had finally swung open, and on the other side was exactly this. Exactly him. She pressed her lips against his shoulder. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now," Kale said, his arms tightening around her. "We deal with Veronique." The Northern Coven arrived 6 days later. They examined Sable for 3 hours and found no trace of enchantment, coercion, or magical manipulation. Their official finding, entered into the royal record, was that the bond between Sable Thornwick and King Kale Denvari was a natural resonance pairing, one of fewer than a dozen documented in the last 4 centuries. The council's petition was dissolved. Lady Veronique Ashgrove was stripped of her advisory position and removed from court. Chancellor Marin, who had enabled the petition, submitted his resignation. The king declined it on the grounds that, despite questionable judgment, Marin was still the only person alive who understood the Eastern Province tariff system. Sable did not become queen overnight. She became something harder to define. The king's anchor, his constant. The woman who sat beside the throne during council sessions, not because protocol demanded it, but because the king's wolf demanded it, and nobody was foolish enough to argue with the wolf anymore. The shifts did not stop entirely. Some nights, the wolf still rose, still paced, still pressed against the boundaries of his human skin. But now, when it happened, Sable was there. She pressed her hand against his chest and felt the resonance steady between them, and the wolf lay down. Months passed. The court adjusted. The kingdom adjusted. The whispers faded into acceptance, and then into something resembling pride, because the story of the kitchen girl whose touch tamed the Alpha King's wolf was, it turned out, exactly the kind of story people wanted to believe in. On a morning in late spring, Sable woke to pale light filtering through the curtains of the king's chambers. The chambers had been rebuilt. New furniture, new curtains, a bed large enough for two and a wolf, because some nights the shift came gently, and the wolf curled at the foot of the bed like a dog the size of a small horse, and Sable had learned to sleep with fur against her feet. Kale was still asleep beside her. His face was peaceful. His breathing was deep and even. One arm was draped across her waist, heavy and warm, holding her close even in sleep. She thought about the night of the frost moon, the midnight bell, the cold beyond the wall, the girl with no coat walking into the dark with nowhere to go. She thought about his wolf, emerging from the trees, pressing his muzzle into her palm. She pressed her lips against his shoulder. His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer, and his wolf hummed softly beneath his skin. Sable closed her eyes, and they slept. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you very soon for the next story.